Hello, my friends. How are you today? It's Sue from Sue Piland Designs, and we are going to play with some applique today. Many of you know that I've just gotten home from our last quilt show that we vended at on Cape Cod. And I had such a lovely time on Cape Cod, and I've got a lot of things to share with you about the show. So at the show, I had a lot of my quilts on display, and one of the quilts that I had on display was my gradations quilt because we're going to be starting up our gradations quilt along this week on Thursday. So if you've had the opportunity to make gradations in the past, we are going to be sending you an email asking if you've completed your quilt. And we just received all the labels for all of the different quilts. And we're going to be sending you a little gift in the mail if you have completed gradations quilt. Well, what if you haven't completed your quilt? Well, we're going to invite you back on Thursday to kick it off again. Now, this is an 8-week course. So if you're already partially through, it's not going to take you the full 8 weeks to get back on track. But if you're just finding out about it, if you've already done a couple of the lessons and a little bit of the work, then you have time to gear up and join in where you left off on gradations. So I've been selling the kits for gradations at that quilt show, and I've only got two of the rainbow gradation kits left. But I just received an entire bolt of the gradation with the rainbow colors on black. So this is an absolutely beautiful combination as well. And we will have more kits up on the website for the rainbow gradations on the black. So it's called Brights on Black on the website. And let me show you that beautiful fabric. So it starts off with the purples and blues, and then it turns into the greens, yellows, and reds. So it's really a beautiful combination of bright colors on that black background. So that's gradations. We're going to kick that off on Thursday. So what else is happening here because of the Cape Cod Quilt Show? Well, I've been thinking about all of those watery quilts, all of those quilts that make us think of the ocean. And today is no exception. We're going to be diving right in and making a little ocean quilt with a lobster on it. So you've seen the lobster you may have seen the lobster that I did in my critter series a couple of years ago. I want to update that lobster. I want to give him a little different pose and a little different position today. And then I'm going to probably be adding my lobster to a baby quilt. And that's a story in and of itself. So I'm going to go back on my workstation right behind me. Let me get this chair out of the way. And we're going to talk about some baby quilts. But before I do, I wanted to share this book with you. This is Storybook Quilts by Laura Piland. Um, Laura, I met her at Quilt Market a couple of years ago, and I was just in love with her simplicity and her straightforward quilts. And she just wrote this book, and she's had an exhibit at her local library of books and quilts for children. And I just love this idea. I haven't looked inside the book yet, so we're going to do that together. But I just love this idea because how many times do you get invited to a baby shower? And now the new thing, and it's not so new, for the last 5 years or so, people have been asking you to bring a book to the baby shower in order to grow that baby's library right off the bat. And I just love that. I want to encourage reading for our young children. And I love the fact that baby showers are asking you to bring a book for the baby's library. Well, what better way to bring a book than to base a quilt on that book, bring the book, and maybe a little quilt to go with it. Well, while I was at the show on Cape Cod, I stocked up for the baby showers that I have coming up. In fact, at the boutique table, they had fabric books made that I thought were just absolutely perfect for little babies' hands, soft little books that can go into the crib with them, and mom and dad can personalize those books and read to the children. So I stocked up on bibs and books right at the Guild's boutique table. But I know that those are going to run out quickly, and I'm going to need to be making some baby quilts of my own based on books. Well, you might have heard me talking about my Quilt Guild raffle quilt this year. We're doing exactly that. We've made quilts based on books, and they're going to be raffled at our quilt show. And I need to get a binding on the quilt that I made. I made blue moons, and I need to get a binding on blue moons so that this quilt can go into the Guild's raffle. So that would be a great goal for me this week. I don't have a lot going on this week. Well, I have a lot of projects going on, but I don't have a lot of teaching going on this week. So getting a binding on blue moons would be a really good objective for me. So let's get back to the Storybook Quilts. What book am I going to include with the Blue Moons quilt? Well, there's a couple of them, of course. Goodnight Moon is always a good children's story to go with the Blue Moons quilt. But there's another book that I love that my children received when they were little, and it's called The Moon Was the Best. And it's a story about people that are separated by a long distance looking at that same beautiful moon and knowing that whenever they can see the moon, they know that they are together looking at that moon at the same time, and it brings people together over a long distance. So I'm going to include The Moon Was the Best with my Blue Moons quilt as my book and quilt together. So let's look at what Laura has in store for Storybook Quilts. Well, I just love that she has a whole series of fairly simple quilts. So I'm going to show it to you this way. I'm going to show you the front page here. And all of these quilts are based on books. Look at number 60 right there. That's a really easy one to do with rotary cut applique. And then I love this number 24. Super big blocks. Can you imagine a little bunny on the corner of that green quilt, or even a caterpillar or a turtle? I love doing big block quilts for our baby quilts and then adding a little tiny applique design element to make it really special. So I'm excited about Storybook Quilts, and I have been talking to Laura about promoting her book to go along with the Guild's challenge this year of making storybook quilts. So I'm going to be promoting this with my Guild, showing them some of these easy quilts to make. Look how simple that is. It's just squares. And then including the books to go along with the quilts. Interesting. I'm really curious that Laura doesn't seem to have the actual books in this quilt that she's basing her designs on. But as you can imagine, when you have a quilt like this with all of the bright colors, that could be paired with so many different children's books out there. And I know some of my Guild members have made this quilt and paired it with a particular book. And maybe I won't share the book because your imagination can guide you. You can find books that would go along with these basic designs. So this one right here, it's all brown, and it's called the Chicks Run Wild quilt. Now, I don't know if that's the name of the book, Chicks Run Wild, or if she's thinking that any little farm animals would feel right at home on this brown and tan quilt. Now, we also have to think about young parents these days and how they are kind of simplifying their design. Young parents seem to want to pick a color scheme for their nursery and go with that color scheme and have all of their nursery items matching in that color scheme, rather than just choosing your bright primary colors. That brown one is a great example. If your color scheme for your child's bedroom is, say, gray and pink, you could do this quilt in gray and pink. You could do this quilt in all blues, all different colors of blue. So that's what I was curious about in her book, how versatile these patterns are. And you can see that they are extremely versatile. Now this one, she's calling the Prince's Bedtime Quilt. I wonder if there's an actual book called The Prince's Bedtime. And what I love about this quilt is all the different size rectangular pieces. That reminds me of our quilt. What's the quilt's name? The one with the locket on it, where we're doing big, wide rectangle strips, and it goes together so quickly. Now, her big, wide rectangular strips are going up and down, and on my quilt, they're going across, and then we've just added a little bit of applique to dress that up. Now, I love this one. We have a nice little square and a square. That's a simple and fun quilt to make, but I want to go even easier. I want to keep my quilt super simple in order to be able to make it really, really fast and get it over to my friend Debbie. Well, my friend Debbie, I met down on the Cape. She is one of our Ahead of the Curve members, Debbie West. And Debbie has been working at the Pregnancy Center down on Cape Cod, helping young families get started with a layette when they're in their 7th or 8th month of pregnancy. And they set up their little shop like a boutique where parents can go and shop for their layette. So Debbie is looking for baby quilts that she can add into the shop so parents can go home with a beautiful collection of items, including onesies and diapers and wipes, but especially that all-important handmade quilt for their child. So we're going to dive right in, and I'm so glad to see Laura's ideas for simple quilts that you can make using her book called Storybook Quilts. And I'll probably dive right into this quilt right here, the Prince's Bedtime Quilt, with all of the different rectangle sizes. That's one I can really sink my teeth into. And I've gotten prepared today to work on a quilt like that with all of you. So I'm not going to give you the instructions because this is Laura's quilt book, and she's going to be guiding you through the how-tos of making that quilt. But I'm going to say that we are inspired by Laura and her Storybook Quilts, and we're going to make a quilt of our own to give Debbie West for the Pregnancy Center. So I have been working on some little critters for the ocean. And during the quilt show on Cape Cod, I played around with our Larry lobster block. And I'm going to continue. Oh no, there goes all my clips. I'm going to continue to play around with the Larry lobster block because what I think would be really fun is to have that quilt with all of the rectangles in blue fabrics and then just add one little lobster on the corner of the quilt. That's a great way to dress it up for a child, to make it really a appropriate for those Cape Cod parents. And I have a feeling they're really going to love that idea of using the lobster as a decorating element for a little boy in the nursery. So while I was on Cape Cod, I worked on the instructions for Larry Lobster. And I learned how to recut all of these pieces. And the last time I did Larry Lobster, I did it while we were on Facebook Live a couple of years ago. And he's been sitting around and getting all messy and losing his antennae here for a couple of years. So it's time I put this lobster on a baby quilt. And I've got all my other lobster parts here, so I know how I made him. And I wrote down step-by-step instructions while I was at that quilt show. So if we have a beautiful blue quilt and we have this bright pop of red on one corner with the lobster, I think it would make an adorable baby quilt. But I also want to have a different pose for my lobsters. So I love the lobster just going straight up and down. It really is the way that you see them on the ocean floor or on your lobster boil plate. But I want to try some different poses with my lobster. And I think it would be really fun to play around with those different poses because the cutting instructions are going to be slightly different. Basically, the claws would be the same. Probably the body part right here would be very similar, but we have to find a way to curve his tail down and under. And I think that's something that I'm going to have fun playing with over the next couple of days. But let's get into making the baby quilts. So what I've done here is I know that Debbie is desperate to get some baby quilts made for her boutique. So I went ahead and I dove into all of my blue fabric scraps. So I just went into my blue bin and I grabbed all of my blue fabric scraps. And I've got a couple of reasons why I did this. Next week for Ahead of the Curve members, I'm teaching Monet's Garden. And for this quilt, I need lots of lights, mediums, and dark blues, things that look like the ocean. But when I was diving into my blue fabrics, I came up with a lot of children's fabrics or things that I think would work well in a children's quilt. So look at this sky fabric with moons and stars and all of the bright colors. Can't you just imagine this as part of the quilt that Larry Lobster could be sitting on? So I'm going to separate my fabrics, and they're still damp. I washed them this morning, and I took them right from the washer into the dryer. I only dried them for about 10 minutes, so they're still damp, and they are ready for a good hot press in order to press them nice and flat. So I'm going to make two piles here, one for each of the quilts that I need to work on. So would this go into a children's quilt, or would this be better in my wave quilt? Well, for the wave quilt, I really need width of fabric. So this fabric is not going to do me very much good on the wave quilt. But here we have, and yeah, I just threw them all in together. So as you can see, there's going to be a big old mess of tangled up fabrics, but that's okay. I want to take the time to go through all of my fabric scraps and actually use them. I don't want to see any of these fabric scraps in the landfill, so I'm going to take advantage of this project that I have of the baby quilt with all of the different rectangles, because I can use up just about everything in that quilt. If I have a big enough rectangle, it can go in the quilt. I can do another baby quilt with all squares and kind of grade those squares from light in one corner all the way to dark in another corner, and make another baby quilt with all of these blue fabrics. So what I'm trying to do is to reduce my load of scraps and incorporate all of those scraps into different baby quilts. So for example, I have a whole lot of solid fabrics that I inherited from someone else. My mom had solids, and one of her employees back at the quilt shop years ago, I went and cleaned out her sewing room recently, and she's my friend Dina's mom, and she donated lots of solids to my scrap bin here. So I want to take all of these solids and put them in one collection to be used for a baby quilt using all solids. And you can see that in Laura Pillard's book. Piland, I'm sorry, I always say that wrong. I'm Helen, she's Piland, and she has several of her quilts that are all solids. So I'm going to be separating these into prints, into solids, and into width of fabric strips that are more watery to go in this quilt right here. So that's my job for today. And after I divide these different scraps into my different collections, because they're wet, I'm going to be able to iron these flat in no time at all. And then I'll be ready to make them into the different quilts that I have planned. Now I may have some fabrics that just don't feel right in either collection. So I've got my solid pile here. I've got my pile of my watery fabrics that I'm going to be using in this quilt. And then I have some really juvenile prints. This one just looks like pickup sticks. And it doesn't really match with this one right here. So I might be having a fourth collection of prints that are a little bit more baby-like, right? They already have kind of a theme to them. They're not just boutiques or tone-on tones. They actually have some little motifs on them that might not fit into one of these categories. So that's how I'm going to divide up my scraps. First of all, by the feel of the fabric. What is the fabric telling me? If it's a solid, it belongs in one pile. If it's a watery looking fabric, it belongs in the second pile. And then if it's more a juvenile motif, like this little pickup sticks, goes beautifully with these little bubbles. Those two go great together. So I'm going to have a little collection started for just those prints as well. So I'm going to encourage you to go through your scraps and start making those scraps into usable, very, very simple quilts. Then by adding just a little touch of applique, we're going to be able to make those quilts really special and really a memorable quilt, not just a charity quilt that you're throwing together with just junk. You're putting a lot of thought into this. You're making it really special for those new parents that really can't afford to go out and buy a whole bedroom set with matching bedding and all of those things. We're making a very special quilt like grandma would make, even if they don't have a grandma that's going to pull together something like that for them. So I think I've got enough right now of the different prints that I need for that rectangle quilt. So I'm going to begin cutting out the rectangles for this quilt, and then I'm not going to do that with you because I've got a lot of sorting and ironing to do. So let me pull this down, because what we want to do now is make the decoration for that quilt. So I've got my little teal pile here with all of these fun teal colors that are unusual, different. They don't really go with the other fabrics. So I'm going to keep that pile right here. I've got my watery prints that I'm going to be using for this quilt. I've got my solids that'll be fabulous. All these blue solids. That'll be fabulous for a baby quilt with those rectangles. And then I have the one that has the bright stars. And I'm excited to play around with this one and see what else I can get to come together with that fabric. Now, one of the ways that I thought about doing this lobster quilt is making a quilt that looks like you would throw it across your table for dinner, right? Maybe a blue and white check quilt. Well, that's where Laura's book really inspires me because she had that brown quilt that almost looked like a plaid. So let's go back to that brown quilt. That brown quilt almost looks like a plaid because she's got a light, a medium, and a dark. Well, I love that because that to me looks like a checkered tablecloth. And wouldn't it be fun to do a blue and white checkered tablecloth and then pop my Larry lobster on there? Now, I know it's a little tongue-in-cheek, it's a little silly, but wouldn't the parents get a kick out of that, where the child is just going to enjoy those bright, bright colors, and it's such an easy quilt to make. So if I did that blue and white checkered tablecloth, her quilt size is 36 by 44. I need a half yard of my dark, I need a yard of my medium, and I need a half yard of my light. Well, wouldn't it be fun to use this as my dark fabric? It has bits of red in there. So if I make my tablecloth primarily like a blue plaid, and then I add the red lobster on there, I think he's really going to pop, yet he still relates to the background fabric. So since I have a big piece of fabric for this, I think that is the perfect quilt to make for Larry Lobster. So I'm going to make that little pile of all my Larry Lobster fabrics. I'm ready to go with that. The solid fabrics I'm going to put away as one of the rectangle quilts. I'll do that one next. And on Monday, when we have our Monet's Garden quilt, I will make some watery fabrics as an example for the students, but I might just not make Monet's Garden, but keep that watery look and, again, put a blue crab on it or put a lobster on it. So let's go back and play with Larry Lobster. How are we going to make that lobster look like he's kind of sitting instead of laying out flat on the quilt? And it may not work out that well. I just want to play and see what happens. So I do have my coloring book pages, and where I get these, I just go online and I look at coloring book pages with the theme that I'm looking for. So I typed in lobster coloring book pages, and I had hundreds of images to choose from. Most of them are free, but they do want your email to sign up for their website. And many of these are teachers or people that are making a business out of providing parents with activities for their kids. So it is their business, so you're going to respect their copyright, give them your information so that they can keep in touch with you. And just like when you sign up for my newsletter, you can always unsubscribe later when you're done consuming that content that they are providing for you. So I'm going to grab my applique pressing sheet, and I'm going to need to turn on that iron. So just give me a second, because you know what happens when I turn on my iron. All of your irons turn on as well. So let's see if I can mute myself for a second. Okay, so now she's got the iron going. I'm going to heat up this iron and I'm going to grab my applique pressing sheet. And let's go ahead and see if we can make that lobster. I cut out a second lobster right here, and we want to see if we can make him look like he's sitting rather than laying down on the ocean floor. So how did I make all of these different design elements for my lobster? Well, I'm going to write up a step-by-step instruction for these. The little arm pieces, right? The little sections that make up his arms, those are just 2.5-inch leaves. Then the claws. The claws are made up of a portion of an S-shaped curve. So I'll be writing up instructions for our little lobster. And then once I have the instructions written, I will share that with all of you. And you'll have that as part of our Ahead of the Curve membership. We'll have new critter series for Ahead of the Curve. So I'm playing, right? I'm just figuring out how to make that lobster using the different components that I can cut out with my Leaves Galore tools. So I've got an S-shaped curve right here, and I'm going to put it together with another piece of my S-shaped curve, and then I'm going to trim it off so it looks like a little lobster claw. So these are just the basic shapes that you can cut with the Leaves Galore and the Hearts and More tools. And then we're going to use those basic pieces and slightly modify them. We're still going to use the curves to cut those curves when we need to modify our shapes so that the instructions are easily attainable by anyone who has the Leaves Galore and the Hearts and More tools. Now, if you don't have the Leaves Galore and the Hearts and More tools, you can simply print out the coloring pages and you can trace this design using Transdoodle onto your fusible and cut out the lobster shape. But I love the challenge, excuse me, I've got a little tickle in my throat. I love the challenge of coming up with a way to do this using our tools. So here we've got one claw, and I'm struggling with the second claw right here. I've got to figure out a way to make that claw look like he's ready to grab you and have it smooth and rounded with our tools. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the bottom of this claw right here. I'm using my 2.5-inch Leaves Galore tool to do that. And now I've got his two claws, or I've got two different size claws. And I might need to make another one because these might not be in the exact right direction I want them to go in. Oh, actually, you know what? These two look good. I've got this one going one way, and I've got this one going the other way. So I'm pretty happy with those two claws. So let's go ahead and press those on our applique pressing sheet. So I'm going to press anything together that belongs together. So if I have my claw already cut and ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and press those two pieces together. And I might only press a little bit where they overlap. Okay, just a tiny little bit where they overlap. And then I can go in there with my scissors and trim off any excess fabric that doesn't need to be there. Any of the underlapping fabric can be trimmed so that I have less weight on my applique shapes. So let's go ahead and do this one. His claw is going to be a little bit more open. These are some fat claws. And I wonder if I made them a little bit too fat with those S-shaped curves. But we're looking at cartoons, right? We're not looking at actual lobsters. And if I had an actual lobster with that big old claw, I'd be pretty happy. I'd have a lot of nice, beautiful lobster meat in there. So I've got my two claws, and I'm going to do a lobster that's kind of coming down at me. So instead of laying up and away, I'm going to have that lobster coming down this way. So I'm going to do one claw here and one claw here. And then we're going to start working with these small little 2.5-inch leaves in order to build up his body parts that lead to his body. So I just can use those leaves, laying one over the other. These two are a very similar color, so I'm going to use a different color here. From the same fabric, I've used some batik fabrics, and I want to just have a distinction between those two pieces so they don't look like they were all cut out of the same fabric. So I've got this one coming in, and then it's going to go down this way over to his body. Again, let me look for a different fabric that is a nice contrast to what I've already got going. Okay, that looks good. All right, and as I do this, I'll kind of hold those pieces up for you to see, because I know being down here on my table, it's a little difficult for you to see. So here we go. We've gotten started, and on my applique pressing sheet, you see how I can press my pieces right in place, and then I can build my design that way. I don't have to have all those individual pieces. Now I'm going to add his body. That looks pretty good to me. Now his claws really are huge. I might want to soften that claw a little bit, right? It's really, really fat up here. But if I just take the same tool and I cut a little sliver off this edge, I can make it a little bit more delicate. So let's go ahead and do that. The tools are just tools, right? You can use them in lots of different ways. So you get to decide how you're going to use these tools, and you can just slim out this curve, even if I have to move the curve along the way to keep it nice and smooth. It's like when you're using a machine quilting ruler. When you're doing ruler work, you don't necessarily have to have the perfect curve. You can follow along the curve part way and then move it to follow it the rest of the way. It's almost like you're drawing, and this is just a drawing tool that you have in order to get you where you want to go. It gives you that nice smooth curve, turn it, move it, and continue on. So there we go. Now we've got his body. Oh, I'm liking that. That's really, really cute. I might not need his arm to be so long. I might take off one of these little elements and only use one to have his second claw coming this way off of his body. All right, I like that. That's looking good. Let me press that together. Now I'm leaving this end part loose because I want to start making his tail, and I don't want to have this attached to the pressing sheet because maybe some pieces need to get tucked up under. I'm not quite sure yet. Now we have the little sections of the tail, and they're like little half moons. They're just little half circles, okay? And this one has a lot more than that under there. It's got a lot more pieces, but I'm just going to use the little half circles, and then I've made some little tail fins as well. So let's see how we're going to arrange those. So the little half circles, I just took my 2.5-inch curve, cut once, moved it down, cut again. So I had a little half circle, and then I rounded the ends with my scissors. So let's go ahead and try using those and see if those are going to work out for us for this particular little lobster. So I'm going to start the first one way up here, and I'm using a fabric that's quite different from his body. I'm going to tack that in place, and then I'm going to go in and trim the fabric that's up underneath. So there we go. We've got a nice junction between his body and his first little tail piece. And now we're just going to kind of round these down. I'm going to just keep adding these little pieces, but they're going to be rounding down. There we go. I'm trying to use some different variations in the fabric here. And I used one fabric, but it had a lot of different variations in it because of the Applique that I used. So there were a lot of different colors in there. And I'm not thrilled with the way his body is coming together, or his tail part is coming together here. Maybe I'm trying to give it a little too much of a curve, or maybe that needs to be one curved piece. So for example, I can take one curved piece of fabric to give me that look of the tail coming down instead of the four individual little half circles. And if I do that, I can quilt in the little half circles on top of that piece of fabric. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go for this look right here where his tail is going out straight, or if I'm going to go for this look right here where you actually don't see the tail under there. It's actually curved down under. If I do the one that's curved down under, then I probably won't use these individual little pieces like I did for the tail that's laying out straight. So I'll probably use one piece of fabric, have that curve under, okay, something like this, and then use his little tail flippers under this way. So I'm going to be adding the little flippers to his tail. And I think I'm going to make that little tail flipper separately. I've got a daisy petal. I've got two little daisy petals. And then I've got this little heart-shaped piece. I made this with the hearts and more, just curved it right down, left a nice wide piece here of almost an inch. And then this part goes up to a little tiny heart shape. So that looks really, really cute for the little tail flippers on my lobster. I also made sure that I had fabrics that were contrasting. So it's all out of one piece of fabric, but these little daisy shapes I made with the more yellow part of the fabric. I used the more red part of the fabric for the center of his tail. And I'm going to tuck that right up under. And I think I've got this curve going the wrong way. I think I need the mirror image of this curve. So this is part of an S-shaped curve. So I need the mirror image. I need a Z-shaped curve. And then I'm going to be able to have his tail turning right downwards this way. And I think I'm going to be happier with that if I use a little Z-shaped curve right there. So I'm not going to fuse this right now because right now I've got an S-shaped curve and it's not quite going in the right direction for me. But I'm still going to play. I'm going to play with that and see if I can make it, give it the look that I want. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for his tail to come right up even under his body. Maybe I can transition that with some of these little half circle pieces. Let's see what I can do here. Let's see if we can make this little Larry lobster have a tail that I'm going to be happy with. And it might take another cut or another piece for this piece right here. I'm not happy with this piece. It's not coming together. I want to transition between here and here. So what I really need is a circle. What I might need is a little half circle of my red fabric that turns this corner. So I'm looking at my 4-inch tool right here, and that could be a little bit big. I think the 3.5 might be a better choice. So let me grab that 3.5 inch. That's from the Rings and Things tools. Yeah, I really do think that either the 4-inch or the 3.5 is exactly what I need to make his body transition from going up this way to that tail coming down and around. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some of these little half circle pieces, but I'm going to make them larger. So they'll start off small, they'll go bigger, and then get smaller again as they come down to this little tail piece. So let's go ahead and see with that piece of fabric that I didn't like, let's see if I can make a piece of fabric that I do like to bring that tail together. And I'm not sure it's going to work, but we're going to give it a shot together. So that's what these Tuesdays are all about. We are playing with our designs and coming up with something that we all like. And it takes a little bit of playing to do that. It just doesn't happen instantly. We need to play just a bit in order to be able to make a design that we're all happy with. Okay, I think it's coming together. I think I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here, and I might not quite be there yet, but I'm going to press this together lightly anyway. I can always pull it apart later, but I just want to give you a display here of how I've made my lobster, not just sitting straight, but actually curving down with his tail fanning out under him. So I'm kind of happy with that one. He's pretty good. And all of these pieces, they may not be perfect, but they do blend together. And with some thread play and some machine quilting, I think I'm going to be able to make that work. So not only do we have our lobster going straight out, right, and straight up and down. Now we have our lobster friend who is curving up and looking pretty darn cute, sitting at the bottom of the ocean. So I'm not going to play with him anymore. I think that's good enough. We've got the one lobster that I believe I'm going to put on the blue and white checkerboard baby quilts. And then the second lobster, he may just find his way into my Baltimore album block. I'm going to be making a Maine block for the Coast of Maine. When I'm up there doing my Scudic Institute retreat, I want a Maine lobster as part of my Baltimore album quilt. So we're going to play a little bit more with Larry Lobster. I think I might shrink him down just a hair down, make him a slightly smaller size to go on that Baltimore album block, and then I can use the bigger one on one of those baby quilts and get another baby quilt underway for those moms and dads on Cape Cod who are expecting their new little ones. If you would like to make a baby quilt, then send it along to me here at Piland Designs. We are going to be sending those quilts down to Cape Cod through the Quilt Guild there, through our Ahead of the Curve member, Debbie West, and we're going to make sure that we have beautiful little sailboat quilts, quilts with lobsters and crabs on them, any type of baby quilt that you can think of, especially boy quilts. We're always in need of boy quilts, but we're also going to do some simple quilts like the one in Storybook Quilts by Laura Piland. And I've got 2 copies of this book. I'm going to go ahead and put those on my website. So you're going to be able to grab yourself a copy of Storybook Quilts by Laura Piland and start making your own quilts. If you have a charity to donate to, that's just fantastic. If you want to help Debbie West create these quilts for little babies on Cape Cod, you can feel free to send them to me, and I will forward them on to Debbie. So I've got my work cut out for me. I've got all of this fabric to sort and press dry. I'm going to sort it into different categories, my solids, my children's prints, my more watery prints, and I'm going to be making quilt tops galore using all of this scrap fabric that quite honestly normally would end up in the landfill because nobody really wants these small scraps of fabric. So we're going to put it to good use. We're going to make some beautiful quilts, and we're going to make some moms and dads on Cape Cod very happy. So I hope you'll join me in using your scraps and strips and squares to make beautiful little baby quilts that you can give away and really help support these young moms and dads. This has been really fun today. I'm glad I got to show you a little bit about Storybook Quilts. I just love this book and I love the idea of giving a children's book and a quilt to those new moms and dads that can read to their babies and create that special bond that every baby needs. Wrap them up in a beautiful quilt, read to them, and you will have that magic bond between mothers and fathers and babies. So thank you for your support. I would love to be your channel to get these babies the quilts that they need. So if you have quilts that you want to make, you can send them to me here at Piland Designs, and I will make sure they go to Cape Cod and get in the hands of those families that need them the most. Thank you so much for joining me on Sewing and Slippers with Sue. You will see Larry Lobster and Billy Blue Crab. He's going to come into the picture too as we complete these baby quilts and as I write the instructions for these little critters and they go into our Head of the Curve membership. Thanks for being here and I'll see you all again very soon.